Probably, if there is a problem in science education, a big problem in the U.S., well, a two-fork problem. One is before university, at the secondary or even elementary level. I think many of the teachers in the lower grades are not really prepared to teach science. They have degrees in education, not degrees in the subjects they're teaching. And I know this because I have talked to enough of them to know that many of them are confused about the things they are charged with teaching. They don't really. Some of them don't even like these subjects, but it's part of their job to teach it. And you can't transmit the love of science or the love of literature or anything that you're charged with teaching if you don't like it yourself. So imagine you're in first grade and your teacher, well, it's part of their job. They have to have a unit on science, whatever that is in first grade.
Okay. So that's your dissertation. So, science education in the United States. I don't know if you, since you're in Central America now, and you have two youngsters yourself. What do you think about?
20 years old.
Oh well, somewhat. Well, yeah, it's relative. When they were in school. So I read an article this week about an NYU professor who got fired because the students thought the class was too hard. It was organic chemistry. What do you think about? Yeah, have you heard anything about the science standards in this country? Have they? Are we still competitive, or is there a danger of the bar being dropped?
I would have to say that not being involved in academics, especially in this country, I'd be sort of all my opinions would be secondhand.
Yes,
I do have opinions on everything, but they might not be worth much. I think that at the advanced levels, at the graduate levels, probably the U.S. still can compete with anyone. Our research universities are some of the best in the world, and so obviously there's probably not much to complain about there. But I think one problem is at the undergraduate level, people enter universities in the sciences without as good a preparation as they do in many other countries, especially in Europe. So from what I hear, the universities have to do a certain amount of remedial work. And so they start out behind, say, students in Germany, for example, or England, which might have a more rigorous secondary education.
Yes.
So it's almost inevitable that there has to be, we cannot be as good at that level as other countries. But somehow we catch up. Because when it gets to graduate education, we are competitive. We're even probably better than most other countries. So somehow we make up the difference. I'm not sure how that works. Probably, if there is a problem in science education, a big problem in the U.S., well, a two-fork problem. One is before university, at the secondary or even elementary level. I think many of the teachers in the lower grades are not really prepared to teach science. They have degrees in education, not degrees in the subjects they're teaching. And I know this because I have talked to enough of them to know that many of them are confused about the things they are charged with teaching. They don't really. Some of them don't even like these subjects, but it's part of their job to teach it. And you can't transmit the love of science or the love of literature or anything that you're charged with teaching if you don't like it yourself. So imagine you're in first grade and your teacher, well, it's part of their job. They have to have a unit on science, whatever that is in first grade. And it's something they just have to get through and they don't understand it and they don't like it. It's not good for the students. It doesn't really inspire them to become scientists.
Right.
And any graduate, well, I only know firsthand about physics, but any physics graduate program in the U.S. has many foreign students in it. Because there simply aren't enough U.S. citizens who want to go into hard subjects. Especially, well, it's definitely not in physics. I don't know, probably the same as in math. It's probably similar in chemistry. Biology, maybe not so much. But in physics, when I was in graduate school, at least a third of the students were from China, Russia, and other countries. And I've heard from my colleagues that it's maybe half in many big departments, like Harvard and University of Chicago. Half the students are from other countries. And it's not because they don't want to admit Americans, U.S. citizens. It's because there just aren't that many qualified people. Aren't that many people who are interested in going to physics graduate programs who are also qualified to do so. And what is the cause of that? I don't really know. Is it because U.S. citizens don't want to do hard subjects? They want to do hard work? That's too facile. For me, I don't really... It's tempting just to say that and criticize me. There are probably a lot of reasons for it that I just don't understand.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of potential downstream effects of that, which I won't go into right now. But okay, thank you for that insight. All right. So your federal career. So you were a theoretical and computational physicist at the Naval Research Laboratory for 21 years.
Actually, 22. I got that one.
22. All right.
Whatever you got.
All right. 22 years. Can you talk about what that work entailed in layman's terms as much as you can?
I worked for a place called the Naval Research Laboratory, which was founded by Thomas Edison. Well, he gave the suggestion to the government that they needed a laboratory like this that was quasi-independent, that would allow scientists to work on problems long term without being directly by the government and told what to do. So they call it a corporate research. The government, what do they call it? The government's or the Navy's corporate research laboratory. So it's administered by the Navy. There's a Navy captain on base who's in charge of the military side, and there's a civilian who's in charge of the scientific side. But it works in a completely different way from other agencies where they do science research, like NASA and EPA, because you don't, in those places, you have a supervisor and they have a project and they tell you to work on this. Right? At the Naval Research Laboratory, you have to, it's like being a university professor. You have to write a grant proposal and get your research funded. So you're writing a proposal to other government agencies, including the Navy itself, including the Office of Naval Research, for example. So I wound up working for the Office of Naval Research on projects for the Department of Energy, for NASA, and for, if you remember, there's something called the Star Wars program, Strategic Defense Initiative. So for each one of those projects, I was part of a group that had to write a proposal to get funded and compete with groups from universities and other government agencies. We had to compete for grant money, just like a professor. So I started, my first job was to work on it's called a molecular dynamics problem, which was computer simulations of crystals, vibrations of atoms and crystals, with applications to what are called energetic materials, which is the polite way of saying things that explode, detonations.
Yes.
So we simulated on the computer, by simulating arrays of molecules, how a detonation wave moved through a crystal. And have you ever heard of the connection machine?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
It's one of the first massively parallel supercomputers.
Okay.
So it had, there were different, there was a small one had 4,000 processors, and the big one had, I think, 64,000 individual small processors. So we had to figure out, because it was one of the first installations of this machine, this is so old, we had to figure out how to program it and how to do parallel computation. And it was well suited to this problem of simulating a couple 100,000 molecules, because you could do certain things. Each molecule you could calculate it independently of all the others. Right? So you could have 64,000 processors. Each one had its own molecule, and it could figure out the vibration of its own molecule independently. But then there was a second phase of the calculation where they had to communicate with each other, and that slowed everything down. But it was an interesting computational challenge. And I discovered some interesting things about how defects in crystals, missing molecules, or defects in the crystallites would affect the detonation or the passage of a shock wave through the crystal. Let's see, after that I worked briefly on a Star Wars problem, the prediction of missile tracks, see on your radar, a bunch of missiles coming at you. How to go from that, as the radar gives you time slices, right? How to predict what the actual trajectory that represents, where that missile's going to come. It was another pure computational problem. How to write a computer program that took data and calculated missile to defend yourself against incoming missiles. That didn't last very long because the funding structure of the program itself was unstable.
Yes.
I don't know if you know the story about why we had a Star Wars program.
No, I just know that President Reagan, that was part of his. He was very into that. He wanted that.
Well,
to combat the Soviet Union.
Yeah, the way I heard it was he had talked about it. He got this idea from somewhere, and he talked about it with his science advisors, and they said, "No, this stuff doesn't work. We don't have technology anywhere close to shooting down an incoming. You can't hit like a mosquito with it." It's just. But he had the idea in his head, and he was going to give a speech, and I forget what speech it was. It wasn't State of the Union. It was some other speech, and he, off the cuff, he started talking about this program that we had that didn't exist. That we were going to have to shoot down missiles.
Wow.
And because he had said it, it had to exist after that.
It had to exist
because it would be too embarrassing to say, no, he made it up. So they started the program because he was blabbing his mouth about it. And it immediately started to be referred to as Star Wars by the scientists. Okay. Not only the public.
I'll have to go look that up. That doesn't sound like the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech.
No, and what's a lesson on the cynicism of most scientists.
Yeah.
Because this program came out of nowhere, was massively funded overnight. And you had a physicist, scientist in general, always trying to figure out how to get the money from the government to do their research. So they want to do what they want to do, what they find interesting. But they have to make it sound like the government needs this research.
Yes.
And no matter what you believe about the government being interested in funding research, it's almost all military. Even NASA, even the space exploration that NASA's funded for,
yes,
there is a military objective underneath that. The government is not going to spend $1 trillion on something unless it's connected to survival, military survival. So we had all these physicists who also didn't think that Star Wars could ever work, but were writing grant proposals to do what they wanted to do anyway, and making it sound like this is for Star Wars. And they would say to each other, out in the open, they would say at lunch, I don't believe it's going to work, but look at all this money we can get. That's out there, that they're dying to give it to somebody. Let's just write this proposal and do what we were going to do anyway, and fit it into the Star Wars paradigm. And that is how grantsmanship works.
Yes.
You say what you have to say to get your grant money.
Okay. So, through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that you started doing some science. Thank you for watching this discussion. It will be continued in subsequent installments. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. And finally, please like, share, and subscribe, especially if you are new.